Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make some monochrome masked cards. These are so quick and easy and so fun to do in batches. We're going to be using some new stamps from our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. They're the trees set that I designed, and I'll have links to everything I used in the video description. For this first card, this is the one we're going to do together, but all the steps are the same. I used some trees from the Woods in Winter set and the Trees stamp set, and for the other ones I used all stamps that were just from the Trees stamp set. So we're able to work in a monochrome theme, which means you don't have to think so much about the colors that you pick. So here was shades of blue greens, here was shades of purple and blues, and here was shades of oranges. And of course you can do whatever colors you want. To get this beautiful inky background, we're going to be using some Distress Oxide ink pads, but you could use regular Distress inks too. That'll work just fine. You'll need a piece of watercolor paper, and I like to take my 9x12 watercolor paper and cut it into quarters, and this will give me plenty of room to trim off. Now I'm using some masking tape that I actually stuck onto my clothing and then pulled off before I stuck it on my paper, and I'm actually reusing it because I can get 2 uses out of each of these pieces of tape. And what I do is I flip it around so I'm not inking against the same edge I used the last time. So that'll just help you conserve your supplies a little bit longer. Here you can see this one from my last card. I had obviously going like that because you can see the stamping on it, so I'll just turn it around and be able to get one more use out of it. I also have another tip to share towards the end of the video. I'm going to be showing you how I'm now storing my my peg stamps and my new unmounted stamp sets. I think it might help you save a little space and be a little more organized. So I'm using a few different shades of ink. I've got a couple shades of green and I've got a couple shades of blue. You don't need to have that many, but it's kind of fun to have some options. I'm going to start with this citron here. It's like a lime green. It's called Twisted Citron, and I'm just going right from the ink pad and I'm adding it right to my watercolor paper. So all of my inking is going to be done in that strip of watercolor paper that we have provided. Now I'm going to my darker one so I don't have to worry about ruining my ink pad. You know, it's okay if I get a little of that lighter ink pad onto this color. It's not going to bother anything. Now I'm going to go in with this broken china. I'm going to try not to overlap my green too much, but it does have a little bit of a green bias to it. And now I'm going to grab one of my fancy homemade ink blending tools, which is just a makeup sponge, and I am going to dab on some Salty Ocean, and I can also kind of blend those colors together a little bit while I'm at it. This ink takes longer to dry, so you do get a lot of good blending time in there. And then if you want any darker shades, you can go in with a darker blue. I try to make sure you get everything covered though, so really push that ink around and get it everywhere you want it to go. I'm going to grab a little of this Faded Jeans, which is my darker color, and just get a little bit towards the top. Don't worry if you get on the outsides. We're going to have to trim this down quite a bit because this is currently 6 inches by 4.5, and we'll need it to be a layer on a A2 size card. Because when I'm doing batches, I like to do A2 size cards because there's no waste and I can do a lot with that. So before you do anything to this layer, I recommend that you dry it with your heat tool. It only takes a few seconds, and that just helps set the ink a little bit. And then you're going to take a spray bottle, and I like to use these big garden sprayers because I find that I get bigger droplets and it gives you a much more interesting look with this type of technique and this type of ink. I let it sit for a few seconds, not too long, and then I blot it. And you'll get a very similar look with Distress inks. The Distress Oxides do give you a little bit of a softer ink, and I find that my dark stamping shows up really well on that. You can also dry this and do another layer of spraying if you want to, and that will considerably lighten everything up. And just blot it again. I try not to take too much away because I really like the look of that. Now we're going to want to dry this really well because we're going to do some stamping in just a second. For stamping, we're going to use VersaFine ink. This is just a really dark black pigment ink, and I find that it can really stand out well on a mottled background like this. I just find I get a really good impression. And underneath my my mat is actually a piece of fun foam. It just makes sure that my stamping is really consistent even though my table isn't perfectly level. Or if my table's a little dippy sometimes. It's dippy, just like its owner. So we are going to make sure that's inked up really well. And I'm going to stamp this first one right kind of off the edge there. Make sure the ink has chance to go from the stamp onto the paper. And then what I'm going to do is do a second generation stamping up high on the other side. And this is going to be gray because it's just using the residual ink. So this is going to be like kind of far away, smooshy trees. I'm going to do this one more time, full strength. So make sure you've inked it up really, really well. I also have a re-inker on hand for this ink pad because I want to make sure I can always have it ready to go. It's an ink pad I use quite a bit, so I do have a full-size re-inker for that. The re-inker isn't cheap for that stamp, I'll tell you, but I think it's really worthwhile because you do, you know, it basically saves you from buying an ink pad about 8 times, so it's definitely worth it. So now with this little stamp set, I feel like I need to fill in down here a little bit more, so I'm going to give it a little pressure. I feel like that masking tape is making a little bit of a bump. Oh, there we go. I just basically want a nice kind of thicket of trees. And I'm going to do this a couple times just in the background with the residual ink. So it just looks like the trees are further away. Now if you want and you're brave, you could drag your ink pad a little bit on the bottom and just kind of pull up a little bit of shadow under that grove of trees. Or actually, you might even just take the tip of your stamp and just try to stamp in there a little bit to thicken it up a little bit, so you don't end up with too dark of an image. You can it's really easy to get overboard with the black. I might do that over here just a little bit too, just to fill in a little bit. Gives you a little more controlled look than your than brushing the ink up. Okay, so we're going to heat set this one more time so we don't smudge it. And then while our tape is nice and hot, it's a great time to remove it because it will come off really easily. See that? Because sometimes, this is a very inexpensive watercolor paper. This is the Canson XL I'm using today. Sometimes those papers will want to rip when you have masking tape on them. So doing tricks like sticking the tape to our clothes before we stick it onto our paper and heating it with the heat tool will help remove the adhesive without tearing our paper. So there's a couple little tricks. Now our stamping looked a little sketchy there, but look how pretty it looks now. So the next thing I want to do is stamp a sentiment, and I am using the Friendship from another one of our rubber stamp tapestry unmounted sets, and I will link everything down below as I mentioned before. And I'm using Versamark ink, which is just a clear ink. You can use any clear ink for this, and we are going to stamp that right here. I know I'm going to trim some of that off there, so I'm going to kind of stamp it over here a little bit. Let me make sure I'm right side up. And I always get a little worried that I don't have enough ink on there because it's a really fine stamp. And I'm just going to stamp that right there. You could also trim this down before you do this stamping, but I'd like to get all the messy stuff out of the way. And then I'm going to grab a piece of scrap paper, put it underneath my card, and I am going to put some clear embossing powder here so I can do a watercolor resist. Because I think watercolor techniques will look really nice with Distress Oxide techniques. Oh, I forgot to use my little pouncer thing there, so I've got a bunch of powder where I don't want it, so I'm going to go grab a paintbrush that I can brush that away with. So what happened here, I think, was the adhesive from my tape. Probably I grabbed some of that embossing powder, and that's why it stuck there. And all the other cards, I remembered to use my embossing pouch, and I didn't have any of that issue, so there we go, teachable moment, right? We're going to heat this up with our heat tool. It'll only take a second. Make sure you don't overheat it, because if you overheat it, it'll go flat, and then it will not resist your watercolor. It's tempting to want to keep heating it, but look, that's how long it took, like literally a couple seconds. Okay, so we're going to set this aside, and we're going to do some watercoloring on this card. You can dump that extra embossing powder back in your jar. And I'm going to use shades to match what I've already used. So I'm going to use some of this pretty blue. I didn't pre-wet it. You can pre-wet it if you want to, but I didn't because I figured it's just going to take longer to dry if I do that. And let's do some green. Isn't that pretty? I think the more loose the better for this. There, just kind of give it a pretty watercolor loose look. So now we're going to let this dry. I don't like to heat this with a heat tool because I don't want to remelt my embossing powder, so we're going to be patient, let this dry, clean up your mess while you're doing that, and then we'll finish our card together. Okay, I trimmed this white panel to 4 inches by 5 1/4, and now I'm just going to put a little tape on the back to help it keep it from wiggling while I do this next step, I'm going to put it on a matting layer here that is like about a 1/16 of an inch larger all around. Oops, I need to readjust that. I try to stick my head in front of the camera, but usually when I am like layering something, I put my head like directly above it so I can see all four sides without any skew. And now I am going to punch a hole in each corner here, and we are going to set an eyelet. And I'm just doing an eyelet to match the paper here. I think that's the best look. I did one where I matched a color in the strip there, but I didn't do the background color that I matted it to, and I think it looks a lot better when I do stick it to the color that if I use the same color as the eyelets as the card base. To me, that just looks a lot more polished and put together. You can do whatever you want though, and then you just need to set each of these eyelets, and the tool I'm using is a crocodile. Now I'm just putting some adhesive on the back, and I'm going to center it up on this card. Make sure it's the right way around so you don't have to peel it back up. I've done that before. And there, look at that. Quick and easy and so elegant and just perfect for that time when you want to send a friend a quick hello. Now, as promised, I'm going to show you how I've been storing a few things lately that might inspire you. First of all, how I store my Distress Oxide inks. This is actually like if you get like a frozen meal, like a frozen lasagna or one of those like Stouffer's frozen things, they come in these really rugged plastic containers. And my mother had given me some leftovers to take home in one of these that she had washed and reused, and I thought, look at that, that fits all my Distress Oxide pads perfectly. I have all 24 in there, and my Distress Oxide reinkers, because I do find that you will need to reink these a little more often than other pads. I found just like this was actually just a little candy thing that one of my kids had. It was a disposable plastic container, but it fit perfectly for that. So check out your recycling bin when you are looking for stuff to store. I also came up with this idea for my all of my new stamp sets and the other unmounted stamp sets from Rubber Stamp Tapestry. And what I did was I just laminated the papers that the stamp sets come with, and then I just stick these stamps on the back of that, and it works perfectly. And if you have cling stamps, you can just drop them into the envelope, or if you haven't gotten around to mounting them yet, you can just drop them in the envelope, and it works really well. And I love that I can just flip through this. And I happen to have this wire bin already, but you could always use a cardboard box. Just again, look in your recycling bin, see what you have that you can repurpose, and it works great. And I did the same thing for my little the little index cards that come with the peg stamp sets. I just had already cut them down small to go in my drawer with my peg stamps, and now I just laminated them. I did have a couple that went through the laminator kind of funny and wrinkled, like this one here, and then unfortunately on a couple of my new stamp sets they were kind of wrinkled going through, but I just ran them through the other way and straightened them out as best as I could. And you know what, my craft room isn't perfect. It doesn't look like it belongs in a magazine, but it works for me, and it's as organized as I need it to be. And to also show you how I store my peg stamps, I've shown this before, but I did have to add area for Christmas themed peg stamps, but all my other ones are right here in this drawer. I have them mixed up because I like to see what ones they end up next to. It sparks ideas, and then I can look at all my different options when I'm coming up with a card, because I use them all together. I don't just keep them with a stamp set, but I do like having the little indexes here in case I need an idea, or in case I'm trying to figure out where a stamp goes. On every stamp set I write, I picked the one I didn't, but pretty much on every stamp set I write the name of what the stamp set is, so that when I'm making my supply list for you guys, I can tell you exactly what's in there. And then there's some other Rubber Stamp Tapestry supplies that I have right there. So that's how I'm keeping my stuff organized. I hope it helps you out. If you want to see more content like that, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed these cards and you give it a try. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to check out our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com, and don't forget to check out the video description for this month's coupon code. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.